on that note, you can both begin.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I'm Sebastian Matthews, and I'm here with Ailish Hopper. I think the talk is, just the theme or talk is white privilege and anti-racism, but we're going to do our best to get at some ideas in and around that. Also, this idea of writing and repair. Also, this idea of fracturedness. I think we're just going to, as longtime old friends, we've been on and off talking about this kind of stuff and sharing each other's work, and so this dialogue has happened and fits and starts over the years. And Ailish, it's nice to keep it going. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Good to see you, Sebastian, and hi everyone, and welcome. And I hope something in what we say will spark either inspiration or question or thoughts, so that this can be a circle and not just the two of us. So please feel welcome. I'm the author of 2 poetry collections, and the second one, which came out about 5 years ago, opened up a lot of thinking around race. Was very much about race. I think Sebastian and I will talk about that. And I've also written a number of essays, and I'm working on a nonfiction book right now, all of which address race and white supremacy in the US. We'll talk more about that later. But Sebastian, you didn't talk about your books, but you have a bunch of books.
Yeah, no, I have a new book out. It's called Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State. It comes out of Red Hen. They call it a memoir and essays, but I really see it as a book of encounters. And it was written between 2014 and 2018, almost in a kind of notebook diary kind of way, just trying to write inside my daily life, and to try to capture encounters that I had with people as I basically came out of a place of fracture. I had been in a big car wreck, and it's been 3 years of healing, 3-4 years of healing, and really a lot of trauma work, and kind of trying to get back into a life that seemed to have moved on beyond me, and also seemed to have changed radically. Last 2 years of Obama, first 2 years of Trump, lots of things that I'd seen in seed or in small ways seemed to really have blossomed or bloomed into this kind of awful, divisive, and fractured place. And I was trying to get connected again for myself, but also as a writer. So meeting people, trying to meet people, try to put myself into positions that I hadn't been in for a while or never had been in, seemed like a good way to do that. So this book is a kind of chronicle of those encounters. Some of them with family and friends, and a lot with strangers. But I first came across your work. I kind of want to just go back and forth, if you don't mind. I'm going to put it back on you.
Yeah.
I saw the early manuscript. I'm even not sure you were thinking of it as a manuscript of the Dark Sky Society, which is an awesome book. And I remember feeling like I had never seen anything like it before, and it's only happened to me a few times as a teacher where I didn't really even know what I was looking at first. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just meant like it was new. I thought, is this poetry? Is this prose? I see it now as very hybrid. I didn't really have that language then. And it happened to me once before. I don't know if you know Layli Long Soldier's work, but I came across her work early when she was at IAIA as an undergrad. Me and Curtis Bauer were teaching there as guests, and we both were like, what is this? Wow. I'd never seen it before. And I felt that way when I saw your work. Do you remember that time? Can you talk a little bit about what you were trying to do, and therefore a little bit about the book?
Yeah. Well, I have lots of memories, but the 2 points of encounter were when we were at an artist colony in Vermont Studio Center. Yep. And I had been kind of messing around with what I thought were poems or fragments. I wasn't sure, but I was interested in slavery and how difficult it is to write about that or put into language something that's so absurd, so repugnant, and yet such a formative piece of our national history. And I should say that when I was in college, well, backing up, I grew up in Washington, D.C., which was a majority Black city, like 80% Black. So I grew up as an ethnic minority, although in a nation state in which I was the dominant ethnicity. So I experienced that. And also my mother is from Ireland, and I grew up going back and forth between Ireland and the US. So I also saw my experiences in DC through that lens. which is all to say that in college, I started taking a lot of courses in African American studies, which opened up a whole lot of our shared history to me. And when I met you, which was like 2006, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
No, yeah, something like that. It seemed impossible to me that I could put those questions that I was asking into poetry, which is for any poet, like a red flag in front of a bull. You're like, no, I have to do it. It's impossible. I have to try it. And something broke open in me while I was at that residency. And what I remember was that you very patiently listened to me, and you were so encouraging. And I didn't know a lot of white folks, and certainly not white poets, who were open to that kind of exploration, and most especially the failures that were sure to come from walking that path on the page, which is also to say off the page. And then my second encounter with you was when I was at a different artist residency, and I was at the dinner table with some older white male poet, and he said, "What are you writing about?" And I said, "Race," which also taught me to never answer that question that way. But and he said something really racist to me, and I, after dinner, went and emailed you and said, "I can't do this. I just can't do this." And you said, you know, "That guy's got blind spots the size of Alaska. You got to get back in there. Now you've got to do it." So you as a person in my life was really important, but also I think our ongoing dialogue has taught me how important that is to being able to explore on the page. Like I think about a line from Brian Turner, and I don't remember if it's in his book, Here Bullet, or in something he wrote about writing Here Bullet, which is about his experiences as a soldier in the battlefield.
Great book.
Yeah, beautiful book. And he said, to paraphrase him, race is the landscape, but the real subject is relationship. And for me, that's definitely true. And in a way, all of my moments of relationship, even in figuring out how to write about race, have been part of learning how to write about race. And you've been a really important part of that.
Well, that's I love that quote. And I felt the same way, actually, when we had our first, conversations about the poems. We started talking, or I started trying to talk about race with you. And I think we talked about it a couple of times at AWP. And I found for the first time talking to you that I really didn't know what I was talking about. I saw it, you know what I mean? I saw that I hadn't done the studying you had done, I hadn't, and I had, my readings I'd been trying to, but I hadn't done it, as thoroughly or as deeply. I didn't have the language. I realized that oftentimes you were kind of correcting my language, not correcting it in a kind of school marming, but you're kind of saying, well, let me investigating the language, and I have friends now who do it all the time with me, where and we do it back and forth, where we really kind of check each other's language, because we're trying to figure out, not so much policing it, but do you hear what you're saying? Is that what you mean? Do you know what this person has said about that? And have you investigated it yourself and looked at it? And that was what I began to do with you. And you were very patient with me too, I thought, because I think I put my foot in my mouth 4 or 5 times. That's one of the things that happens when you do this, right? Is when you're trying to talk about this stuff, cross culture, cross race, cross all these divides, you're stepping into your own puddles of mistake over and over again. So I feel that I'm a reciprocal feeling with you for that. So thanks.
Yeah.
Do you want to read, or I can read, but maybe you could start, because we talked about Dark Sky Society. You want to read one of those poems, and then I'll read something in response, and then we can talk some more?
Sure.
I have a couple, but what are you thinking, I guess?
Oh, you want to, if there's one that you...
Well, the two that I was going back to, one is Song of Whiteout and Blackache. And the other is Ways to be White in a Poem. And maybe Ways to be White in a Poem, if you don't mind, because it also has some of that fractured hybrid feel to it that maybe it's harder to hear, but it's certainly on the page you can see it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about this idea of fracturedness too.
Yeah,
I came prepared. I'm ready.
So, and then the only thing I need to say about this is just there are some italicized lines in it. And I make the, when I'm reading, I make the international symbol for quotes. And just so you know that that's not my voice, but someone else's. Ways to be white in a poem. Tension makes a form resound, and so the many lines I am told not to cross. Do not go out alone at night. Do not call attention to yourself. Closer to the color line, the more I am white girl, fool. It is a while before the other girls correct me gently. Good timber needs more air. Shout out. Muscles flex, quick shift. I stomp, impious, impervious now. Do not dance suggestively. Hold a stranger's eyes. That first day in the gym, I asked the row, could I? Thinking about cheers, elbows sharp, foregrounded, feet cloud stepping, never of a cheer as the body went up, as if I were not, branch creaking, rope taut. And maybe you too, whoever you are, hearing this, flicker. Do not touch or eat their food. Do not drink from the same cup.
That's an intense poem. Is that? I kind of feel. What's the backstory? If it relates, it feels almost like cheerleading.
That's cheerleading. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
the one white cheerleader my freshman year in high school.
Yeah. And so those are voices that you kind of heard either in your own head from somebody else, or actually heard kind of in a kind of dialogue that with the other voice.
Yeah, I have come to see most of us who are, certainly those of us who are writing out of a position from white identity. Obviously, for most of us who are writers, this is also what we're doing, but trying to kind of stand in my voice and not all of the voices I've inherited. And at the same time, because I'm writing from the positionality of whiteness and white privilege, I don't want to just disown and ignore those things. So I was trying to sort of balance between my own voice coming out and what I now call my ethical voice from these inherited voices. And that's why the book is dedicated to, what we do with what we inherit. And that's really what I was curious about as a poet, but also as a person in the world. What will I do with these inheritances?
I haven't read the book yet. I have it on my shelf, or actually on my table, the Wilkerson's Cast, but I read a part of it in the New York Times, and she mentioned this idea of inheritance. Like the metaphor is this country is an old house. We've inherited it. We live in it, and the foundation is cracked. So we can't really get away with saying, "Oh, well, it's not. I just inherited this. This is not mine." It's like, no, you own it, and it needs help. It needs work, and I love that idea of inheritance.
Yeah, totally. I'd love to hear you read something now.
Okay, I'm going to read an encounter early in the book, and well, actually, before I start, I want to read you a quote from this book, Begin Again. I feel like it's a book that I often read this quote now that I'm starting to read from my book, but awesome book you should read if you haven't. Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. It's a great subtitle. It's exactly what the book is. But he has a quote that's it's actually quoted in the book as off like an interview. But he says, this is Baldwin speaking. The book is by Eddie S. Cloud Jr., but this is Baldwin. I think I really understood, and probably for the first time, that what you were doing as a writer or any kind of artist was not designed to, to make special or to even isolate you. What your role was, it seemed to me, was to bear witness to what life is, does, and to speak for people who cannot speak, that you are simply a kind of conduit. And that for me really speaks as I didn't follow that as a code when I was writing, but when I read it, I was like, I think that's what I was trying to do here. This is a piece called Close, and it was written, as you'll see, right around the time that people were beginning to vote for, who's going to be the Democratic and Republican nominees in 2016. And I live in Asheville, North Carolina. So a lot of these pieces early on are set in Asheville because I didn't really get very far. I was a hermit for a couple of years as I recovered. I recovered from, I don't know how much I described, but basically this book starts, from trying to recover from an accident and coming out of a really a hard, difficult time of aftermath and trauma. And when I began to move out into the world, I found that the world seemed traumatized. Like we were all suddenly PTSD survivors, and triggers seemed to be going everywhere. And I couldn't tell, are they my triggers? Am I misreading that? Of course, that begins to move into some of the things we could talk about around like microaggression and implicit bias. It's like I couldn't tell where I was coming from in relation to other people, and I couldn't tell what they were doing. And I realized that was just compounded, a situation that always happens in this country, but it was getting more kaleidoscopic for me. But I had a few moments early on where I began to connect, and I began to kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, this is called Close. These are vignettes, all about a page and a half. A quick look of mischief in her eyes. Who'd you vote for? I was getting a 6-pack of beer, the obligatory I voted sticker, an emblem on my shirt. The young clerk couldn't have been more than 17. Tall, thin as a rail, her light brown skin unblemished, hair plaited perfectly. I said, Hillary. I'd vote for Bernie. Yeah, I get that. I almost did too. She hovered the 6-pack over the scanner. Then why didn't you? I chose my words carefully. I'm not sure he'll make an effective president. She grinned. Better than Trump? Oh, yes, much better. The man behind me in line shifted his weight from foot to foot, a pinched frown shellacked on his face. I didn't care who heard or how it made them feel, nor did the young woman who went on a brief but passionate diatribe against Trump's many deficiencies. I slid my card and tapped yes and no as the clerk snapped a green rubber band between her fingers. She said, that white man is evil. I was taken back, not by the sentiment, I wholeheartedly agreed, but by the way the young cashier attached the adjective to the noun. A flash of worry in her eyes as she ripped off the receipt and handed it to me. Not that you're like that. I looked her straight in the face. If that's being white, I don't want to be white. And I think maybe that's a little bit of what you're getting at about the idea of owning whiteness. Like I can't pretend I'm not white. As my friends keep telling me, for some reason, I'm the most white person they ever known. And my joke is, anyway, I can read a piece about that. But yes and no, right? And also, I don't want to own whiteness without, in the way that a lot of people do, as if it somehow gives me privilege or gives me, a leg up on somebody. I want to dismantle that if I can. But I loved how she said that in public to me. I took it as a compliment in a way that she could say that. Then she was like, "Oh no, I made a mistake." She wouldn't look at me. I just left quickly, like, "Okay, we're done here." Yeah.
The thing I love about both that scene and the other scenes, I think of them really as scenes, like almost like little one-act plays or something. And so the accumulation is a reminder that race is this is someone else's phrase, a guy named James Scott, who's a political theorist, but he called it a dramaturgy of power, right? And we're sort of like assigned these roles, and there's like an acceptable script, and then there's like the stuff we say like backstage, you know what I mean? And so these little one-act plays kind of, you can see the script, and you can also see, how sometimes when you're at the theater, you like see the human behind the character. You can see both, like in that, and I feel like you're finding these. It shows how wonderful awkwardness is. Like awkwardness is this fruitful, I don't know what's happening, but things can open up. It's like improvisation in music, which I know you love as well. These moments of feedback, not so much, but maybe, and then you build off that.
Yeah.
Can you show that? And also you show the refusals, the kind of retrenchment and the, you don't know, kind of thing, which is what we're very used to, I think.
Yeah, and it's it's like there's white on white hostility. It goes all different directions, all different ways. And there's willful misunderstanding, awkwardness. Like one of the things that really early on, I know it did for many people, that influenced me was Citizen, right? Claudia Rankine's book. And the beginning of that book and the way she threads those microaggressions that she's kind of cataloging And I think it opened a lot of people's eyes. I knew that those happened and existed, but the way she conveyed them challenged me in a way that to try to see them and write about them myself, to join in a conversation from where I was coming from. And I realized that there were micro awkwardnesses too, and micro misconstruences, and then there were willful versions of it. And then there are also ones where people really don't know that they're doing it. And then there are times when they pretend they don't know they're doing it. There's so many layers. And I think there's a hashtag out there called watch whiteness happen. And I realized after the fact, that's kind of what I was doing, is trying to take the veil and see my role and try to step out of it, or see where I couldn't, see where I stepped into making mistakes, and having to kind of live with them in the moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wrote an essay. It kind of began as like a rant in my head. And then it's funny because the two people other than my mom who've read it, not really, but that's how it always feels when you're writing something, said it seems so reasonable. And it's a hard won reasonableness that came out in the essay, because it started as a rant and me kind of, the spirit of an essay is you're arguing with yourself to figure out something about truth. But the title is Can a Poem Listen? Variations on Being White. And I hyphenated being white, because I really do see it as like an activity that we participate in or not. And one of the things that's been really cool for me over the course of, the decade and a half that I've been really kind of making my mistakes in public is the number of white poets and writers, but especially poets that I've learned about who've been doing this, and seeing their different approaches, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't, but starting to see that, part of this work is we want more spectrum. Like whiteness will keep casting us into this role. It's like a form of politeness. It's a lethal politeness, and so we want spectrum. We want lots of different ways to come into poetry or come into prose or music or film, that acknowledge that positionality and that socialization, but also, embody something else. And so seeing it as an activity, and we can make micro repairs. To go back into that, right? And they flower. So.
That's beautifully said. I love this idea of lethal politeness, and being white. I do. It's an act that I think you need to continually disavow yourself from, or at least watch yourself in, and try to handle it from within if you can. It's hard to do, I think. And I think one of the things that's been hard I've been hearing a lot of my white friends who are writing or trying to be an activist or trying to speak, they feel like they're trapped. And I don't feel trapped, but I see that as a challenge, that right now is a time for somebody like me, a middle-aged or 55-year-old white guy, liberal, bleeding heart liberal, to kind of shut up, right, and step back and listen. That's what's being asked by, I think, the time. But at the same time, you can't sit back and be silent, which that kind of complicity is the worst thing. So that's a challenge. That's a conundrum. How do you shut up and speak at the same time? And I think that for me, Beyond Repair was a task of trying to write in the minor key. Like, I'm not trying to pretend my voice is major right now, or that I'm a major writer, or that I can, or the subject matter is in a major dominant key. It's more minor, and I want to have I want to have a voice in the conversation. I want to be in a conversation. And I think that white people need to be more and more, white writers need to, remember Major Jackson's essay 20 years ago now?
No, 2007, October. I'll never forget it, because
Yeah, and it was
huge.
Yeah, huge. And basically, in a very, as Major is, very generous and very kind but stern ways, challenged white writers to start writing about race, and called out the folks who were doing it, and kind of by omission, kind of calling out the folks who weren't. And at that time, I was kind of like, hey, Major, I'm writing about it, and he was very generous. But then I realized, no, I'm not really. I'm trying.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really getting at it. And so I was challenged by that in a really positive way. And I know a lot of folks were too. A lot of people were kind of insulted by it, but those are good good pieces. I love that piece that you wrote. I was one of the people that read that essay. Wasn't it in the Boston Review?
Boston Review, yep.
Well, I was honored because you talked about one of my poems, and I have to say I felt like I wanted to say, "Hey, Major, look, she thinks I'm writing about women," you know. But it was an honor. Do you want to read something else?
Yeah, but first I want to tell people, so I wrote about Sebastian's poem, We Generous, which maybe you were working on when we first met, or had you just finished it maybe?
I think I just finished it. And I think you wrote about the one about the, not
Oh,
that
yeah.
one, but listening to James Blood Ulmer at the
Yes, the
expression.
Howard, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the essay, I talk about how you captured this scene of like some drunk white guy who's watching a black artist, and the drunk white guy is making an ass out of himself. And the thing, which is like something that a lot of white people who are in black spaces or around black culture,
Yeah.
which is they often sometimes that's like one black artist in a room full of white people, but you know,
Yep.
or maybe just listening when there's no black people around, but we're listening to the, you know, residue, the art. That, you know, how to negotiate those kinds of things, because I think for a lot of white people that's really the closest we get to, you know,
Yep.
thinking about something else that's possible. But then what happens is we end up kind of consuming and or appropriating, and so that's not.
Yep.
So what does it look like to have an open-hearted apprenticeship, you know, open to it, something else that's possible, open to somebody being more than just their race, including ourselves, you know, what does that look like? Well, it definitely doesn't look like the drunk white guy making an ass out of himself at the, you know.
Yeah. And most importantly, drumming off, clapping off rhythm.
That's right. Not even musical.
During a drum solo.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that, for me, what was striking about that moment in your poem was that, first of all, you had the guts to be honest in your poem about it, which I just feel like there's so much the lies of omission and politeness. If this works by this lethal politeness, the first step at least is risking being impolite. And I've just been wrong so many times, but at least I'm stepping over the line into some other way of being. So you did that, you took that risk in your poem. And then I thought you really did a nice job of showing the ways that one of the ways we get into community with each other is around a kind of alignment or shared, it's not so much shared interests, but things travel in codes, and they travel in pulses, and they travel in music. And some of it lives way past where words can reach. And I felt like you were going for that in your poem. And that's what I want a lot more of us to be paying attention to in what's happening around us. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So in Dark Sky Society, there's I'm talking about growing up white in a black city, and I'm talking about also being in Dublin with my mom, and then there's another subject, which is my father, who died in 2007 but was brain injured for pretty much my entire life with him, and the kind of twin experiences of having a parent. He had aphasia, and he also had aphasia was the thing that I was focused on. Like he used one or two word phrases, and so kind of noticing what happens in code was something that was on my mind a lot. So I think I'll read The Good Caucasian.
Yeah, that's a good.
Because I think something that I'm kind of surprised that I haven't been called on more is the ways that phrases by Black artists show up in poems in this book, and they're part of these like many voices in my head.
Yeah, here's some James Brown and a couple of them, at least one of them.
Yep. So this is the Good Caucasian, and the epigraph is from Lee Scratch Perry. It's the ghost in me coming out. When 40 acres have besieged my brow, and a mule and a winter cold as ice cube, I try a remembrance of things floating past Miss Daisy and her necklace of finger pointing. Title pages on the south, now squares of ash, centers embering. If memory be a mountaintop, mine is hidden by fat, puffy clouds and other symptoms. But when disraced in men's eyes and by time dust the centuries, I will admit impediment. My body is where we are held. My eyes have drawn your shape and you mine. Not I have a dream, a cold, cold feeling.
I like how you read that slow and let those short lines really open up.
Thank you. I probably should have mentioned actually that that particular poem has more Shakespeare lines in it than, felt like I was trying to rifle through Shakespeare's pockets and go, you know, what kinds of nonsense are you trying to hand down in all those beautiful lines that you have? Thank
I
you.
heard that from Willie the Shake,
Yeah.
Joni Mitchell. Yeah.
You want to read another one?
Sure. Actually, I want to ask you about fractionness, but maybe we can talk about it after this piece. But
Okay.
it's called Code, and it's one of the pieces where kind of observing whiteness, and in this case, white supremacist kind of hostility was thrust at me in a surprising moment, and almost daring me to do something about it. And it was very coded, and I don't know how I understood so quickly what they were doing, but it was it's called Code. When I walk up, the two young Best Buy clerks are standing face to face at the checkout counter, talking about getting together after work. They are white, clean cut, only a few years older than my son. You could come by after 8, one says to the other. Okay. The guy in the aisle glances in my direction, then steps out of the way. As his friend behind the counter rings up the single ream of paper, the box of ink cartridges, the dude starts to banter. The second was when it was done, right? Yes, says the other, finishing the phrase. Not the fourth. The fourth was when it was ratified. They nod in unison, grinning. It seems they are putting on a show just for me. A good day indeed. I can't help it. It's late June. History nerds? The guy behind the counter smiles, about to nod his head. The older guy leans back in, a menacing gloss to his smile. No, I just love my country. I'm not buying it. It's been only a half year since the Parkland shooting. This guy is cloaking hate under a flag. I collect my things, and before heading for the door, and against Allie's sage advice to refrain from engaging in such situations, wag a finger at the young man. If you love your country, you should know its history. I get a surprised look in return, and then a glare, which I meet with a cold professorial stare. I want to say something about we the people, but no, it would only fall on deaf ears. So I listen to the voice in my head and head for the door, my step picking up only slightly as I approach the car. You know, there's moments when people are being very willfully racist and are making you implicit or complicit in the act. And I think we have to do something about it, even if it's just me being like a nag, you know. Anyway.
Well, that kind of goes to what you were saying about, you know, this is a moment for white people to listen, but at the same time to do something.
Yeah.
I have a joke with a writer friend of mine. We're sort of like writing buddies. Like when I have to do something, I text her and go, okay, I'm going to do this thing. You know, text me in 3 hours. And I joke about, you know, keeping your head, you know, put your head down, but keep your head up, like at the same time. And it feels a little bit like that. This task of listen, but also do something. And I'm sympathetic to the sense of futility and frustration and paralysis, I think, that a lot of people feel as a result. You know, I've come to think of moments like that and people like that. You know, I think there's a lot of people in this country who are under the misguided apprehension that the country is an ethnic state.
Yeah.
And we're not an ethnic state. We're a civic state, a civil state. And so I've become very kind of quietly confident and also the more I've looked at what this work is, the clearer it is to me also that this is not a project of people on the left, even though there are a lot of people on the left who are leading it when we talk about cultural competency or, you know, being able to be honest and be connected with people. That's not a political project. That's, you know, that's actually integrity. And so I think the longer any of us do this work, the clearer and more confident I think our communities can be. But I like the way that scene kind of gets at the way that there's kind of a logic that people are hiding inside of, you know, that racism hides inside, and it travels via codes, you know.
Yeah.
It requires them, and as soon as we call the code, you know, something changes.
Yeah. Nice. So you said to me in an exchange just recently, and I kind of want to know why I want to point this out, but in some ways, there's been a long gap between some of our conversation around this stuff. So I just want to say I'm so glad we had this chance to pick it up again. So, but you talked about fracturedness, and you said something like you really want to write about other things or about wholeness, or I forget how you said it, but you can't. The way to get to that is through having to write about race or fracture or the things that you find yourself writing about. Can you say that better than I just did?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I think my real subject is wholeness. You know, and definitely in Dark Sky Society, I started to notice that what I was really asking was, is it possible to dream for something else? Because so often the calls to dream, you know, Martin Luther King's dream, or, you know, to really imagine something better, a lot of times they're just sort of rehashed versions of the problem. They don't get us there. You know, love is not enough when you're talking about challenging power. It's just not enough. But at the same time, if we don't have love, you know, we're just cannon fodder. So there are some sort of basic dilemmas involved in imagining something else. And so I started to think of it, and I'm borrowing from the abolitionist movement, the current abolitionist movement, which really talks a lot about horizons and, you know, the eradication of things, you know, not as something that's going to happen like Tuesday at 10 a.m., but it's like a horizon we're moving toward. But it's also an activity. Like every day I can choose to act from a place of wholeness and relate to other people from a place of wholeness and relate to my communities from a place of wholeness, which is to say, kind of how else could this be? And then move from there to what's actually happening, you know? So that wholeness, I think, is, but if I write about that without acknowledging the stuff that's going on, that's fantasy. That's not wholeness. That's something else. And fantasy's cool.
Well, it makes me think. You know, some of my best friends are fantasies. You know, that joke works sometimes, and sometimes it backfires, which it just did there. What I was thinking was Kendi's, you know, this term anti-racist, which really is a helpful way to think about this issue. Feels like in some ways, what you're talking about is one way to kind of move into our anti-racist stance or place, not even a stance, a real place. It just kind of it pushes right past that dichotomy of racist or not racist. It's more like, no, how do you live an anti-racist life? How do you live a whole life with all this truth, not turning from the truths of everything that is going on, which is so hard to, you know, if anybody's turning from it right now, they are willfully choosing fantasy.
But at the same time, I don't know. I think I'm really grateful for the work of Ibram Kendi, and I know a lot of people who have been tremendously helped by the book White Fragility. But I also know I spend a lot of time in movement spaces and have for a good long while, and I actually think movement spaces are more important for white people to get connected with than any book group or any, I mean, I think it's a place where the center of power is different. And so we can experience both getting checked, fine, that's going to happen anyway. But but we can also kind of see what else could be and kind of get used to it in a way.
So you say
and a lot
movement
of-
spaces. I'm sorry to interrupt. I really am.
no.
I think I know what you're talking about. You used to mean like getting involved with the group and moving into activism with others. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, it can look like different things. I don't do a lot of the activities that people might call activist, like going to protests or things like that. I mean, sometimes I do, but most of the time I don't. But there are some, unions, labor unions that I support in Baltimore. There are a number of groups that are affiliated with Black Lives Matter, smaller organizing groups. And if I know individuals that can support them or connect with them, I make connections between people. So, and then there's a group called Standing Up for Racial Justice, which is a group that organizes white people, and they're affiliated with Black Lives Matter. They're sort of like an ally group. I think they're really important. I think they're really, really important. And I think these spaces that are really about what's called grassroots or on the ground organizing, it's much more than just protests. They're really evolving like a theory of change. And it's so different from what happens in institutions. I don't care what the institution is. It's just really different.
I agree. And there's some great stuff going on in Nashville, and I've been getting involved with some amazing people building bridges in Nashville. Some of the work that's being done around trying to do reparations, it's incredible. I agree. And I find that I'm not a frontline person, and what I'm beginning to learn how to do is to do backline work, helping organizations with projects they need, trying to make small group connections, connect people. So I'm with you, and it's new for me, and it's the only way to go. I think you're right. Now that I've found it, I don't want to go back, whatever that it is, because it changes.
I
We're
think
supposed to stop in a few minutes. I'm sorry to interrupt. What were you going to say? And then maybe we each can read one more piece.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that a metaphor I really like is I'm borrowing from Zen practice, but people sometimes talk about the work of, Bodhisattva is the character in Zen for this like great compassionate being who vows to save all beings in all directions. But the metaphor Zen teachers use is that that action should be as natural as reaching for your pillow in the middle of the night. And I like that as an expression of anti-racism too, that it should, what do I have that I can share? What do you need? Who, bloom where we're planted. And that is kind of what the word, it's not something special or needlessly hard. Right where we are is right where we should be.
Awesome. Jennifer, do you mind if we each read one piece quickly? I think we go a little bit over, just a few minutes over.
No, actually not at all. Although I do have one question to address to you, actually, and specifically it's for you, Ailish. The question is, whiteness, so there's a quote from you, whiteness is an activity we participate in. And then this is the question, what does it look like to participate in whiteness or to refuse to participate in whiteness?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe going back to what I just said, which is like everywhere we are is an opportunity, is an entry point to participating differently. So, I mean, just in the last week, so I teach at a college. So I've been in a number of different meetings where I can observe the dynamic there, the ways that certain white people are being quiet about something. And if there was a person of color in the room, how might they wish that we were behaving? How might that conversation go differently? What can I say that would help pivot that conversation? How do I talk to my kids about what's happening in the world? To things like how do I spend my money? And how do I relate when I'm corrected on something, I think. I don't know, Sebastian, what would you say? There's like such a long list. These are all that micro repair thing.
Yeah, it's all good. All those are right, I think. And it is a long list. And it's a great question. I think it's one of those questions that are active questions that don't get answered really, but you keep asking the question.
Yeah. The one thing I will add, which I've been thinking about a lot the last 5 years, is there's a whole lot of taking credit for stuff. Like I think people call it virtue signaling. And something I started doing very intentionally, and now I just can't stop, is I'm really not public. I mean, I'm writing about some stuff, but the vast majority of stuff I do, I'm not public about. And I think that's important too. There's a place for me to be public about it because I think white people need to see other white people doing stuff. But that I was really socialized, and a lot of us, you know, who are in certain professional spaces are socialized to take credit for stuff all the time. Totally
Yep.
not necessary.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, let me read something quickly and then you can finish, okay?
Okay.
This is a new work. It's poetry, it's essay, I don't know what it is, but it's inspired by, in some ways, by your form in your book. But it's a long piece and I'm just working on it, not gotten very deep. It's called Double Negative Capability. And it started as kind of a joke, but then I realized, or a bad pun, but then I realized that one of the problems of negative capability is that it's a bunch of white guys in very comfortable places feeling really free to to express themselves. And it's not that hard to do that. It's much harder to do it if you're in an internment camp or if you're this or that. I mean, if you don't have the luxury, the time, the privilege, where do you write from? And how you do it? Because I asked that because I realized that I've been writing from privilege my whole life. So I'm just going to read you two short pieces. One is, where do I write from if all I've ever written from is a place of privilege? Where do I stand when I no longer stand on a platform? Like Ginger Rogers doing everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in heels. Imagine Wordsworth or Keats trying to write while squatting in a flophouse or from the cold cement floor of a detention center cell. Where's the tranquility in that? It ain't there. Nor would there be the fire and ice calm you get when you've got the world in your pocket and time to kill. No shit, sing-songs the chorus. That's it for that.
I love that piece. I'll do a really short piece that's at the very end of Dark Sky Society. After history. The rain will reach everywhere, sooner or later. Even the leaden seams that curl and hide. My tongue, finally at rest. See? Music. How the iron blooms in the spring rain. Powdery rust of the world clinging.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a beautiful poem. It's great talking with you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks for having us.
Many thanks to both of you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Yep, thanks.